The Longest Day, this time on Bill Whittle Now. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle, and Bill, you probably well know that book about June 6, 1944, The Longest Day, but I'm not referring to D-Day. I'm referring to Election Day 2020, which has not yet ended and shows no signs of doing so. Normally in Bill Whittle Now, I have some very specific questions and kind of try to guide the discussion, but it occurs to me that that really clamps down on your freedom of speech. And every once in a while, I should allow you to guide the discussion a little bit. And so what I want to get a sense of this time, Bill, is where do you think we are in the longest election day of history? And a couple other follow-ups along those lines. But currently, what is the state of Election Day 2020?
Well, it's not the longest election day in American history. That would belong to the 2000 election. That went on for 32 days until December 13th, I think, or the day before the electors were required to meet by the Constitution. And at that point, when the United States Supreme Court told the Florida Supreme Court that they couldn't just keep counting votes, that their electors had to be in Washington on the date that was appointed for them in the Constitution, that's when Gore conceded. So we haven't reached the longest election day yet, but nevertheless, I understand the basic premise here. I have done a great deal of research since the election. I mean, a great deal of research. And I found all kinds of things that appeared to be statistical anomalies, and I'd dig deeper into them and find out, well, there's an explanation for this, or the guy didn't do the math right on that, or so on. But beneath all of this, and by the way, I've gone to the fact-checking websites and fact-checked a number of things that people were talking about as true, and turns out they just weren't. But with that said, there is nevertheless, across the board, monumental overwhelming evidence that this election was tampered with. And at the very least, at the very, very, very least, that the security around the election was criminally negligent and therefore in itself a form of election theft. The short answer to your question is, we are going to see in the courts whether or not these claims have any merit. Donald Trump's attorney came out yesterday or the day before as we record this and said that she had staggering amounts of evidence, staggering, and also said that they were that this was going to turn into, she didn't say this, I'm putting these words in her mouth, but clearly if you follow her line of reasoning, this could turn into the largest criminal investigation in U.S. history. But with that said, she said, look, we're going to release the Kraken. And
did she say release the Kraken?
She did. She
Good.
said it.
I just like when people use that phrase in public.
I do too. And and as a very small subset of this answer, it once again, it shows that I'm just mystified that everyone around Donald Trump understands social messaging, understands things like pop culture much better than the Democrats do. With Joe Biden's got his No Malarkey tour, which will appeal to those of you guys shipping out for the South Pacific. But yeah, release the Kraken. That's serious talk. And this woman is an extraordinarily competent and successful attorney. She does not strike me as the kind of person who is basically blowing air in order to move the needle of public opinion. So that's
now, Bill,
where I sit on it.
She should, though, strike you as somebody who's representing a particular client who has an interest in the outcome of this election. And I want to back up a little bit to what you said. You referred to this election, or you referred to criminally negligent security. Now, when you say that, you're actually saying more than that, because the group of people at the federal level and state levels who are responsible for the security of our election, and the department within Homeland Security that is responsible for effectively blocking out tampering with our election, said that this was the most secure election in the nation's history. Of course, the guy who was the head of that agency was summarily fired on Twitter by the President of the United States shortly thereafter. But what you're suggesting, I'm saying now, Bill, is not just that the security was awful and criminally negligent, but there is a massive cover-up at the federal and state level of the criminally negligent security.
Of all of the stuff, I was thinking about this on the way in this morning. Of all of the stuff involved in this, not just this 2020 election, but in the last, well, it began in 2008. Oh, actually, it began with the Clintons. But of all of the things that I've seen in this country, I don't think anything causes me more heartbreak and on some level more genuine terror than the corruption of law enforcement in this country. So to answer your question about the guy in the government who said that this is the most secure election ever, I would remind you that the former director of the FBI was one of the people that manufactured evidence in collusion with the person who lost the 2016 election that went into the process of becoming a 4-year coup d'etat against the sitting president. And that was the director of the FBI. Similar.
Well, this wasn't just one guy, Bill. This was the whole, I forget how many people they said. I think 60 people signed on to this letter that basically said it was the most secure election in American history.
Well, that is a ridiculous thing to say. That statement alone is a ridiculous thing to say. That is a stupid, insane. The fact that they could say that, if they had said that this election is secure, that's one thing. To say it's the most secure election in American history, really, it's
sounds
more
like
secure
something
than
President Trump would have said.
More secure than Dwight Eisenhower's win in 1952. More secure than that when everybody went into paper ballots, hand counted them in individual precincts. They're trying to tell me it's more secure than that election was, really, when everybody had to be a registered voter and you had to show up with ID at a voting place on election day. This election is more secure than the 1952 election of Dwight Eisenhower. Is that what they're trying to say? Because if that's what they actually said, and it is what they actually said, then there is your evidence right there.
Evidence of what, Bill? That the nation's security experts believe that it was a secure election?
Evidence that there are people who are involved with this thing that go very, very deep. And I have spent my entire life fighting against unfounded conspiracy theories, but where there is evidence, there is evidence. And when it turns out that James Comey and Brennan together did the kind of collusion necessary, on the way in today, I heard that on the Mueller investigation, the people, something like 20 of the phones that were turned in after the Mueller investigation, 20 of the personal devices owned by the people involved in that investigation had been wiped. Several of them had been wiped twice. And when they were asked why they were handing in wiped phones, they said because they'd forgotten the combination, the 4-digit combination that you use 10, 15, 20 times, 100 times a day to unlock your phone. All 20 of those people said, well, we forgot our key, we forgot our ID number, and we forgot it so many times that the phones just reset themselves. Anybody who makes a statement like that is so obviously plainly lying. And we've just come completely accustomed to it. Completely. It's like watching Michael Jackson sit there on that interview and tell us that he's never had any plastic surgery. No, I never, nothing. No. I don't believe it. And when you find evidence, now I'm not talking about, I think these guys are lying and when investigators in the Mueller probe turn in 20 personal devices that have been wiped clean, and every one of them is using the excuse that we forgot our code, our access code. Yeah, I never forget it. I use it 100 times a day, but I forgot it on this day. And I forgot it so many times that I kept entering it in the course of an hour. It took me an hour to enter it. And after I'd entered it 200 times, the iPhone basically wiped itself because it felt like it was in somebody else's hands. You expect me to believe that? The head of the IRS in what was 2015? No, it was probably earlier, 12, something like that, said that, no, all of these investigations into conservative 501c3s that the IRS was denying. Well, where's the evidence? Where are the emails? Well, they were on a computer server. Well, we want to see them. We've subpoenaed them. Unfortunately, our hard drive went down. Really? Well, then show it to me from the backup. That kind of went down too. Oh, okay. Well, it's shared on 1,500 computers across the Internal Revenue Service, so get it from one of those.
I know, Bill, that you're building a rhetorical case that there is corruption in this election because there has been corruption in the past.
This is not a rhetorical case, okay? This is not a rhetorical case. A rhetorical case would be me referencing, Virgil and talking about corruption of the Roman Republic. I am putting down evidence. When she said that 1,500 computers had all failed at the same time, we can get to the bottom of this right away. Right away, we can make this very, very, very simple. Jeffrey Epstein is put in prison and he has dirt on some big, big players. Next thing you know, they find him hanging in his cell. And when they ask, well, isn't there security cameras on this guy at all times? Well, yes. Well, what happened? Well, apparently during the 4 minutes there, the cameras just kind of stopped working. We don't really know what happened. Some kind of electrical fault. And we took it. The brazenness of the lie is not what should shock you. What should shock you is we took it. And everybody on the internet now is making a joke out of it. Epstein didn't kill himself. No kidding. Really. The evidence that Epstein is murdered was the fact that the cameras went down for that period of time. That's the evidence. That's the evidence. That is the cover up. And it's all across the board, all of it. And so when you ask me what I think is going to happen, I think that there are still enough patriotic people out there who have come forward with sworn affidavits, not only saying that they witnessed this fraud on a wide scale, but they were asked to collude in it. And that they're going to find evidence that these election information was stored on servers in Barcelona and in Canada, and that President Trump had the foresight to declare a state of national emergency back in 2018 via executive order, saying he was deeply concerned about the security of the national electoral system, and that these investigations are going to bring some big heat. So if you want to know how I feel about the election, my question now is, will we be able to find a court in America, including the Supreme Court, that is able to look at evidence and base a judgment on that evidence? And if the evidence is insufficient, then Biden's the president. But let's be clear on one thing. Systematic fraud does not have to succeed in order to invalidate this election. In other words, if you have proof that a team is cheated, they're disqualified. It doesn't matter if they won or not. It doesn't matter if they cheated enough to win. If there is signs of a side cheating, that side is disqualified. And the reason is because if they're not disqualified upon the evidence of cheating, then what you've basically done is you set up a world where you say, cheat as much as you want to. And worst case scenario, okay, well, you lost anyway. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And this goes back and back and back. It goes back to the 1960 election, at least, when it was clear that John F. Kennedy had stolen votes in Chicago to win the election. And Richard Nixon, who's despised by the left, had enough class and enough love of his country to not fight that election that he had stolen from him, and decided to simply go along and concede because he didn't want to tear the country apart.
So final question, based on what you understand to be the state of the election day, as it were, right now, what do you think is the Trump campaign's next best moves, and what is the best possible outcome?
You know, I had some clarity on this too. And I'm not blaming people for using this term because this is a common term, but it's important to be precise when we're talking about matters like this. Technically speaking, November 3rd was not election day for the president of the United States. It was election day for everybody else, but it wasn't election day for the president. November 3rd was the day that each individual state polled their individual state populations and determined who their choices would be for president on a popular basis. And then according to tradition, the states would then inform their electors to go to Washington and vote according to the will of the people. But election day for the president of the United States in 2020 is on December 14th. It's not on November 3rd. So all of this president-elect stuff and all of this office of the president-elect and all of this stuff is not only immoral and wrong, it is part of an ongoing psychological campaign to lock the idea into people's minds that Joe Biden is, in fact, the winner of that election.
So is there an electoral college play here that you're suggesting?
What I'm suggesting is I think what we have seen, the Constitution, Scott, and I need to keep constantly throwing this out here. One of the reasons that I wanted to work with Scott Ott in the first place is because Scott Ott is not only a very funny guy, but his work on the Constitution called Freedom's Charter back at our previous employer is just one of the best things I've ever seen. I don't know anybody who understands the Constitution and the documents that founded the Constitution better than Scott Ott does. So he's playing an idiot on TV because that's what we pay him to do. But in any event, the Constitution is so functionally perfect that it is virtually impossible to not ascribe some kind of divine guidance to it. So what does the Constitution say? Does it have everything is covered? There is an option for everything. And as it turns out, this option has been applied at least once before in American history. It might have been twice, but I'm certain it's once. And I'm virtually positive that was the election of 1876. And I think it was Rutherford B. Hayes against Tibbet, something like that. So here's what happens. Here's what look, there is law in this country. And all I'm fighting for is the rule of law. If Joe Biden legally won that election, then he is the president of the United States, and we just messed up on the messaging. But the evidence against that is overwhelming. So what does the Constitution say in a case like this? Well, what the Constitution says is very clear. It says if there is evidence of fraud that is widespread enough, it is possible to have the election results thrown out by the Supreme Court. It's essentially declared null and void based on the fact that it cannot be a trustworthy count of the vote of the people. Well, what happens then? Well, then it goes to the House of Representatives and the House, and the wording in the Constitution is profound. If the electors cannot reach an agreement, meaning more than 271 votes, it must immediately, that's the word in the Constitution, it will immediately be voted upon in the House of Representatives. But since the states elect the president, as far as I'm aware, this is the only time that this actually is in force. In the House of Representatives, every state gets one vote. California gets a vote, and Wyoming gets a vote. They get to vote like the Senate. And the reason that the founders did that was because they knew that the House was, quote, unquote, the freshest take on the American population's attitudes and opinions. They went to the place that could theoretically be, you could completely replace every single seat in the House of Representatives every 2 years. And the Senate is designed to make sure that you don't get runaway mobs and stuff. So what the founders did was they said, if this thing is in such dispute that a judgment cannot be reached, then we're going to send it back to the people through the House of Representatives. But in this particular case, we are not going to make it a proportional popular vote because it never has been. The idea of a running total of here's the total vote for Trump, total vote for Biden is a piece of window dressing. It is utterly irrelevant to the election of the president. Donald Trump could have 20 million more votes or 20 million fewer votes. It doesn't matter. This is how the system is set up. If the Democrats don't like it, they are welcome to try and get some constitutional amendments in there to change it. But nevertheless, those are the rules. And since the rules have been employed before, and since this is exactly what happened, this is precisely what happened in 1876. The election was so corrupt, it got thrown to the House. The House voted, and Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, was elected president by one vote in the House of Representatives. Now, they didn't have 50 states back then, but nevertheless, that's how close it was. So we've been down this road before. And if you think that things are tense now, try to put yourself in that situation 11 years after the Civil War, having defeated the South and finding widespread corruption on the part of Democrats throughout the South, including the mass murder of Republicans at rallies and blacks and so on, that the Democratic-led KKK and all of those anti-voting organizations that the Democrats deployed, because the Confederacy was the Democratic Party leaving the Union.
And so this whole scenario, Bill, is contingent upon no candidate having 270
We've been down this road
votes.
with a result that stood the test of time. No one's contesting Rutherford B. Hayes' presidency. And that is where we are today. So it's all going to come down to the evidence. It's not going to be enough to say there's some little irregularities here or we noticed that this was there. No. What they're going to have to show, and what I believe they can show, is that this voting system called Dominion was in fact invented in Venezuela by Hugo Chavez and has been used throughout the world in order to influence elections. That's what Dominion software was built to do. I believe that case can be compelling from evidence that I've seen, but I'm not presenting the evidence. So I think there's evidence of that. There's no question that some of this data was stored overseas, and there's no question that people overseas had access to that voting information. All of these things are indisputable. And if they can put together enough sworn testimony on the part of people across, you don't have to do it for 50 states. No one's contesting what happened in Delaware, and no one's contesting what happened in Texas. However, if Donald Trump survives this coup attempt and is reelected to a second term legally through the mechanics of the Constitution, then I'd be willing to bet you found this kind of tomfoolery in every state. And I'd be willing to bet you in California, if you really dug deep, if you had a press, we wouldn't have to be doing this on our own, but that ship sailed a long time ago. If you dug deep, you may find that Hillary Clinton didn't even win the popular vote in California. It's entirely possible she didn't, given the degree and the ease of voter fraud. And I'll close with one thing that I saw from evidence that looked very good to me, turned out later to be a little spurious. So I'm not counting it in my calculations, but the initial concept is perfect. The election it's a box, it's a machine, and people's votes go into the machine tabulates the votes come out, and that's the answer. What this gentleman said was very simple, but very, very, very profound. And people need to understand this. If we don't know what is going into the box, then we have no way of knowing what's coming out of the box in terms of its accuracy. For example, if we have an election and there are 50 registered voters and we watch every single one of them vote, we know that 50 votes went into that machine and 50 votes are going to have to come out. That means somebody might get 30 votes and somebody might get 20 votes. But if somebody gets 30 votes and somebody else gets 70 votes, there's something wrong inside the machine because 50 people voted and 100 votes came out. You can't know whether this election has any integrity unless you know how many votes legally went into the system. And the way we used to handle that before we got to the most secure elections in history was we used to have a roll of registered voters. And if you wanted to vote, every citizen not only has that right, they have an obligation. You simply register to vote. It's not hard. You'd send something in a stamp. You do it at the post office. You can do it online now to register. And then you would know how many votes went into the machine. And when you know how many votes go into the machine, you can tell how many votes come out of the machine. But if you don't know how many votes are going in, if you're allowing votes from people who haven't registered, if you're allowing votes from people who are dead, if you're allowing votes from people whose signatures don't match, then you have no way of knowing the total votes that went into the machine legally. And since you don't know that number, you can manufacture whatever output you want to. You can not only magnify the vote, you can also subtract from the vote. You could actually have an election where fewer votes went out than came in, if that suited your purposes. And that's what the software is designed to do. So if 80 people certified that this was the most secure election in American history, if I was one of those 40 people, and I was an honest-to-God American patriot, which I happen to be, and I saw no evidence of tampering in this whatsoever, I would never, ever put my name to a statement like this is the most secure election in American history. I could be 100% certain that this election was carried out faithfully and honestly, and I would never sign a document like that, ever. That is an absurd statement to make in an age of electronic vote counting. Forget the fraud. When we find glitches, oh, what happened? Well, it turns out 5,000 votes that went to Biden should have gone to Trump. Well, how do you explain it? It was a computer glitch. Computers don't glitch. Can we understand this? A computer, every time we blame something on a computer glitch, the computer doesn't make a decision. Anytime an error comes out of a system that is run by a computer, it's one of two things, and it's both human error. Either the information was input incorrectly by a human, or there's either a bug or a hidden feature in the software code, but computers don't make mistakes. Computers do not make mistakes. Software runs the way it's written. And if there's a problem, a glitch, then somebody has either miswritten the software or misentered the data or both. And so this whole idea of a computer glitch, like a cosmic ray, what happened? A cosmic ray came in and struck it. And boy, there's a lot of cosmic rays out there, and they sure are coming from the blue parts of the galaxy. That means they must be rushing towards us at great speed, because all of these blue cosmic rays are causing all of these computer glitches, and all of the red cosmic rays are not causing any.
The member-written blog at BillWhittle.com is overflowing with new writers, new ideas, new comments under each video or blog post that you find there, and you're going to really enjoy being part of this rapidly growing group of American patriots. And I say American patriots, that includes people overseas who are not yet Americans, but feel themselves to be American patriots. We have people in many other countries who are also supporters of this enterprise because they dream of the kind of land that our members believe we should have and are actively working to sustain and advance and restore. If you've not yet become a member at BillWhittle.com, please go to BillWhittle.com and click the big green Become a Member button. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.